Kind of excited about this group today. This is a group of people. We have been kind of traveling this series together, haven't we? This has been fun, been eye-opening. I get a lot of phone calls from people, many of you and other people who have been watching online. And this might surprise you. Not everyone likes what we have to say sometimes. They don't always agree. And then other times they say, man, I never thought of it that way. That kind of opened up the whole thing, and I'm really excited to kind of delve in deeper and see what this is all about. I'm excited to see this in a new kind of refreshing way. And so I am honored to be a part of that, to open up conversation every week. So Art of Deconstruction, how many of you have enjoyed this series?
Well, we have to say yes, you're sitting right here.
Yeah, pretty much. You have to, or you look bad. Art of Deconstruction has been fun for me. Here's the thing about deconstruction. It's really popular right now. A lot of people are deconstructing stuff. And it's almost like, I picture like the image of someone taking a hammer to the stained glass of a church. And I see people just smashing it. And I think sometimes that's a lot of fun to just smash things, isn't it? It's fun, but it's not always very constructive, is it? Because at the end of the day, you just smashed a bunch of glass and you're left with a lot of shards. Deconstruction is great if in the process you're also picking up those pieces that still work and you're reframing them in a new way. That's when deconstruction is actually a really positive, beautiful experience. And that's why at the end of every talk we do, we take time to talk about how this whole thing can be seen now in a bigger, better light. And you can see this and you can reframe it in this way. So it's not a negative experience, it's actually a really positive one. And so be very aware that we want to show you how to reframe the thing in a really powerfully good, beautiful, constructive way. That's our goal. And so we've talked about the Bible. We talked about how the writers, they were not simply writing to explain what scientifically happens in the beginning of the world. That was not their intent. They did not know about carbon dating. They were not aware of all of these different things that we know today as science, right? That wasn't their intention when they wrote the Genesis account, which is why Genesis 1 and 2 don't agree, right? Because it's not a literal telling, there's something bigger metaphorically going on. And so when you look for the meaning, you can find this cycle over and over again for Israel. They experience life. There's something good going on. But at some point, they don't allow wisdom to steer their knowledge. And when they do that, they end up in captivity, end up in brokenness. And at some point, they call out. And they experience a new resurrection, a new life into the new, away from captivity. Every single story, you'll see this told through every character over and over again. And so for us, we choose to look for the deeper meaning, whether you believe it was literal or symbolic or whatever. Please don't miss the deeper picture. There is a meaning there. Don't miss it. There's a beautiful, powerful meaning, and this was their intent. We all experience cycles of life, death, resurrection. And the question is, will we allow wisdom to steer us as we walk into the new life we experience? If we don't, we end up crashing the car. We end up feeling guilty, shamed, and alone. And again, the story of a guy named Dirt and a woman named Wisdom, they put on what? Yeah, they put on death, basically. They put on the coverings of animals they had to kill. There's shame, there's death when we don't allow wisdom to steer our knowledge. So we see this cycle over and over again. We understand ideas shift with time. We understand everything told then had meaning and purpose, but ideas will shift, give them enough time. How many of you have ever told a story and give it about 5 or 6 years? You tell that story again, you may have added some details, right? The fish may be a little bit bigger that you caught. It may even be a whale, right? The stories get bigger or ideas shift. This was the perspective before, but now it's kind of changed. So we talked about, for many Christians, the redemption story for them has been, there was creation, there was a fall, now there's the stain of evil sin on us. We're bad, we're evil. We need some kind of murder in order to redeem us, right? So God needs something to die. His son dies in our place. Now we can go to heaven again. This has been often the redemption story. And we talked about how this was not actually how the Jewish people thought. The shift again was with the Catholic Church moving into 396 AD. I'm giving you a ton of info, but you've all heard this already before. This was essentially coming from Constantine, and we understand that Jews never actually believed in this redemption story, the belief of original sin. That just was not part of it. And so all this to say, things change. We are originally blessed with the freedom to choose, to grow, to change, to evolve. And that's a beautiful perspective, and that's one we can learn to walk in. We understood from one of the talks we did, Jesus becomes the new symbol for Israel of how to learn to walk in freedom, how to reorder life. We understood Jesus was not a white American man. He was Jewish. Jesus lived in a Jewish culture. He was a Jewish rabbi. And knowing that means we should probably understand a bit about Judaism. And that's why we take time to study it. And lastly, we understand that the Messiah, the role of Messiah, was always to reorder the world. And so the question is, how do you and I learn to reorder the world when there's brokenness around us? Everyone good with that? Yeah, beautiful. That's a ton. We've gone through a lot of information the last 4.5, 5 weeks. It's been fantastic. So I want to move you into a new concept. And last week, man, I forgot about last week. Last week, we talked about homosexuality. We talked about mishpat, radah. Have any of you had a chance to talk about that with anyone, by the way? Kind of fun. Hopefully you didn't weaponize it. You didn't use it to like beat people over the heads with, but you opened some interesting conversation. Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Let me just move to this. Okay, good. How many of you have ever heard someone say, we just need the gospel? We just need the good news. Have you ever heard people say that? Like, I just want to hear the good news. I just want to hear the gospel preached. The question is, which gospel? Which good news? Because this might surprise you a little bit. Every different tribe has their own twist on what they think the gospel was, the good news. And if you talk to someone long enough and you ask enough questions about their good news, you'll find their good news is actually different than the tribe down the road. And it's different because there's just a little shift. And so I want to share with you the main concepts of what the good news has become for many people today. For me growing up, and many of you, the good news was this. It was, again, the story of redemption. We're sinners, we're evil in the sight of the Lord. Everyone say, yay! Good news! You're all evil, you're decrepit, you're evil sinners. Left to your own devices, you're always going to do the wrong thing. What a terribly, powerfully good view of humanity. Yeah, if that's the view, no wonder you're going to continue doing the things that we sometimes do. And then when you do them, you're going to beat yourself up. Again, talk about shame, guilt, and fear. That's the concept. Because of that, we needed something to die in order for things to be set right again. Again, we just talked about this. Jesus chooses to be the sacrifice in order to put mankind in right standing with God. For many people, that is their good news. What's, again, interesting is that story of redemption was not the story Jesus was sharing. It wasn't the good news. You won't find Jesus sharing that anywhere. That wasn't the good news he and his disciples were sharing. Can you imagine if I told a bunch of people who were following, hey, y'all, just so you know, next week I'm going to die. Spread that around, baby. There might be some people that are like, finally, maybe, I don't know, but we hope not. But at Jesus' time, there were definitely people who wanted him gone. But to his followers, that would be miserable news, right? It's not actually what they were sharing. They were not sharing that as the good news. You won't see Jesus sharing that, nor his disciples during that time era. Again, original sin was contrary to the teachings of Judaism. The whole idea was not what they believed, Jesus being a Jewish person. So that's one thing. Again, Jesus never once shares that as good news. The other one is this. If you believe in Jesus, say the right prayers, believe Christianity's God, again, you believe the certain things about God and accept the sacrifice of Jesus, you can go where? You can go to heaven. Yeah. I remember hearing that, and I even remember hearing that again. Jesus is going to come again, and good news, he's going to take you home, right? Who's it bad news for though? Anyone that doesn't fit within what you believe, right? So I remember thinking, oh crud, I better make sure that I'm doing the right thing, right? I even grew up in a tribe who said, we think we know when this is going to happen. We think it's going to be very soon. And so I remember thinking, oh man. I even had one of my relatives say, Tony, don't even worry about high school. Graduation, Jesus is coming before that. Don't worry. When I heard that, I thought, oh no, Jesus is coming again. He's going to burn everybody, right, that doesn't agree with him. Those people burn. I better get my act together. But wait, I've got till 2000. Well, 1999, because Prince said. I've got till 1999. And I could do enough fun stuff until about 98. And then I could get my act together, right? And I could avoid the fire. I know I'm alone in saying all of this, right? But essentially what happens is life then becomes fire insurance, right? I'm doing all these things to avoid fire and get up there so I can live forever. Many people, this is their thing. And I remember many of my relatives dying, waiting for Jesus, talking about this their entire lives. Heaven, heaven, heaven. This is the gospel message. And that's what they shared with everybody. But then I remember learning some interesting things about what was going on in the first century and also just the Bible in general. What's interesting about this is here's from just one of the many, many rabbinical voices about the idea of heaven. The Hebrew word is actual plural heavens, and there is no mention of the creation of heaven, a realm not visible or anything that can cause or be seen or proven. In fact, nowhere in the entire 5 books of Moses, with a few exceptions in the whole Torah, do you find any idea of a realm where they talk about it and spend a lot of time on it. Were the Jews interested in the Old Testament? Did they spend a lot of time talking about what happens when you die? Very little. You want to know why? Because it wasn't important. They said things like this: you'll know when you know, I guess. When it happens, you'll know. To speculate, they often said, was a waste of time and energy. Watch this. During Jesus' time, there were some shifts. Sheol, the word Sheol meant death, right? When Jonah goes down to the belly of the whale, the word Sheol, he dies, right? The idea is Sheol, he goes down to Sheol. If that's where you believe people go and they die, then we're all going to end up at the bottom of the ocean, if you take the story very literally, right? But the idea, the word here, Sheol, meant death. And so what happens in the first century is they begin to say, maybe like the Greco-Romans, there is something interesting that happens when you die. They never used the word actually heaven. They used the concept Abraham's bosom. Is this interesting? Speak up if any of you are like, wait a second, wait. 2 groups. Sadducees. The Sadducees said this: we don't know. We don't really care. We'll find out. We'll find out. We'll know when we know. That was the Sadducees. They even said resurrection, all those things. We don't know. We don't know. The Pharisees said this: you go to Abraham's bosom. And in Abraham's bosom, what will take place is that if you're not the righteous, which again, righteous meant you were Jewish. So what happens to anyone that's not righteous, by the way? That's not Jewish. You die. That doesn't seem fair, does it? Oh, but that's what they believed. Anyone not righteous. The righteous would go to Abraham's bosom. There in Abraham's bosom, what would happen is you would have a time of judgment. And there in judgment, you would either go somewhere else or you'd go and you'd die. Abraham's bosom. So when you talk about, if you want to be like really biblically accurate, literal, and take the first century people's perspective on heaven, I feel like we should all just start saying Abraham's bosom, right? Did he go to Abraham's bosom? Do you think he made it? How funny would that be to your friends? Keith at a funeral, and we pray that he is in Abraham's bosom right now. And yes, the Jews, that's what they believe, Abraham's bosom. And please don't just take my word for it, research it. You will find yourself almost laughing because it's so different than what it's become today. It's become very Roman, very Greek in the way that we view the afterlife, because we kind of took on a lot of ideas from that culture. But this is the Jewish perspective. All of that to say, it wasn't the good news. That wasn't what Jesus and his disciples were sharing. You don't see Jesus going around talking about Abraham's bosom. And when he talks about heaven, he talks about the kingdom of heaven, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But let me share with you something interesting. Before the death and resurrection of Jesus, notice this, the disciples were proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Interesting? Before the death, before the cross, they were proclaiming the good news. And notice what happens with the good news, what's closely connected? Healing people everywhere. Interesting. So what is the good news if you're going to look at the Bible, first century people? Here it is. It says this: when Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out demons, cure diseases, sent them out to proclaim this, the kingdom of God, and to heal the sick. If your good news is not about the kingdom of God and healing, it's not good news. If your gospel message brings more guilt, shame, and fear, it's not actually good news. It's not what Jesus and his disciples were talking about. So consider, what good news have you been given? Has it been healing? Has it been restorative? Or has it given you a lot of fear, shame, and guilt? Because if it has, it was not actually good news. So they were to proclaim the kingdom of God. So what is the kingdom of heaven? What's the kingdom of God? Let's go there. Here are other kingdoms. How many of you recognize the big one? Rome, right? Egypt, Babylon. These were large kingdoms in our history. And these kingdoms, by the way, I'm so glad we've evolved. Like we've changed, right? Because here's what those kingdoms would do. Those kingdoms would use force to gain control and power. Like, what an ancient tribal thing. Like, thank goodness we've evolved. Those kingdoms, they never had enough power, land, and resources. They would actually, check this out, they would go to other empires and they would take their resources. And sometimes they would even sell it back to those people. Isn't that gross? Yeah, thank goodness we've changed. They would exploit the weak and add more and more to the powerful. Again, the weak would suffer. The powerful would get stronger and stronger and stronger. Leaders had their best interests in mind over the people's. This is what a beastly empire looked like back then. They would use fear, guilt, and shame to control people. And watch this. They always had a scapegoat. Why is it really interesting to always have an enemy? What does that do to someone? Like if I got you all riled up and I started talking about like a common enemy of ours, what would that do to you? Because in this room, there are a lot of people, we see things very differently in so many different ways in this room. What happens when I talk about an enemy that we all don't like? It unifies us, doesn't it?
Also makes it us and them.
Yeah, us and them. Oftentimes you'll see preachers talk about the devil. They'll really build up how evil the devil is, and the devil's doing this and this and this, and people will get really riled up. They'll become unified. Because what you did is you just built a whole thing around an enemy. We do that with different races. We do that with different groups. We do that with family members. We do that with many different ways. We create the enemy. We talk about the enemy, it unifies us. That's what empires would do. And oftentimes for the Jewish people, guess who was the scapegoat? They were. Yeah. But Jesus says, I have a different kind of good news. I have a different kind of empire I want to share with you. And so there's this word, good news. It means, the word in the Greek is euangelion. And this is what would happen. When a king stepped onto a throne or a new ruler, they would send out town criers, basically, and they'd go into the new place and they'd say this. They'd say, hey, our leader is going to bring change. change, capital C. Our leader is going to make Rome great again. I used Obama and Trump, so don't hate me. I picked fun on both sides. Our leader is going to bring in change. Our leader is going to do the thing. Our leader is going to make Rome awesome. We're going to destroy everybody else, and it's going to be our kingdom. That's the word. It was a very politically charged word, euangelion. And so Jesus says, my kingdom, my good news, is not by the tip of the sword. It's through love, forgiveness, restoration. How many of you, when you hear that, you think, how can that possibly do anything against terrorism, war, violence? How could that possibly do anything? That's what the Jewish people were saying. When they heard Jesus say, you want us to love the people who are slaughtering us, who are treating us poorly? You think that's going to be a kingdom? That's not going to last. Like, that's the idea, though, that Jesus comes in with, and he's seen as a radical. People are not so sure about him. He says, my kingdom's different. So I want to share with you some interesting things Jesus says about what his kingdom looks like and how it is given. So here we go. And some of you, you've heard me give a couple of these ideas before. Here's what he says. The thief, right? The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what empires do. His kingdom comes to give life and life more abundantly. And so here's what his kingdom, the actions of his kingdom look like. Here's how we reorder the world, shalom. Everyone say shalom. That does not mean just a state of nonviolence. Shalom means this: nothing missing, nothing broken. It's a state in which you live. Can you imagine living a life where there was nothing missing, nothing broken? Like that's a deeply beautiful, restorative life, right? That's where we head. That's where we want to head. Violence does not do that. Fear, guilt, shame does not bring us to nothing missing, nothing broken. And Jesus recognizes this. He says there is a new way of ordering the world. And so he says this. He says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people. Jesus quotes Leviticus. Often in the New Testament, you'll see quote after quote after quote of the Old Testament over and over again. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let me ask you this. Who's your neighbor? When you hear that, who's your neighbor? Stop it. You're jumping ahead. Okay. Most people think of their neighbor, even today, as the people who agree with them. When you go to a church and everyone agrees the same thing, all the same thing, you have a nice echo chamber, and it's really beautiful because you can just kind of say the same thing and everyone's like, yeah, I totally agree. What about those Democrats? What about those Republicans? What about those Catholics? Right? Whatever. We can create the echo chamber and all of us will agree, and it's not very difficult to love you, is it? Because you're the same as me. And so this is how the Jews saw it. Their neighbor was the Jewish community that they lived. However, Jesus twists it a bit. He says in the past, when we talked about people outside of our tribe, we said life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. That's how we enacted justice with people outside of our tribe, and even sometimes within it. But he says this, but to you who are listening, I say this, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Easiest thing in the world, right? Does that, read that for a second. How does that land for you reading that? I know so many people that read that and they're like, it's metaphorical. No one can possibly do that. It's something we can try to, move toward. But what do you think of this?
It breaks the cycle.
Okay. If you want life more abundantly, if you want to be free, truly free, Jesus says, this is the way to go. This is the good news. It's really bad news to Roman Empire. It's really bad news to people who respond with violence and hate, injustice for injustice. But it's really good news for people who truly want to be free. Again, anyone ever make a comment on Facebook, an angry comment to someone on a thread? What happens? What happens if you really touch a nerve?
That's fast.
It blows up, doesn't it? What happens to the person who says, oh, interesting point. I may not agree, but I really do love you and respect you. It just dissolves it. No one's ever like, I hate you. Don't ever say that again. Like it just kind of the tension's gone. And this is what Jesus is referring to here. He says, everyone's our neighbor. The way to dissolve this tension, I'm going to show you right here. He says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. That's fantastic if you want to be a doormat, right? Great. Yeah, anyone ever thought about that one? Someone hits you across the face and you're like, you become like this masochist. Hit me again. I want 2 black eyes. The whole thing is weird, right? Well,
isn't it interpreted that actually not to present your other cheek for them to slap, but to turn away and like walk away from the situation?
I'll tell you, it's even deeper. In our culture today, this just seems like a weird doormat policy of what to do with, when someone's angry. But here's what it looks like. Who am I angry with right now that I could... Austin, come on up. I want to show you guys what this looks like. The right hand is the hand of power. The right hand. The left hand is your poopy hand. This is the hand you do your business with. Even in the Middle East, many places today, you will not have someone use their left hand with you. That is the hand that they do their business with. That is not the hand, right? When you went to hit someone, you used your right hand. Now, if I'm standing here with Austin, and I look at Austin as someone who is of the same social status as me, I'm going to use my fist. When you hit someone with your fist, let's say I had a really good uppercut, and his face is going to go that way a bit. I'm going to feel really good, right? I hit him, but when I hit him with my fist in that culture, I'm saying you and I are equals. However, watch this. In that culture, if I hit you with my backhand, always the right hand, when I hit you with my backhand, I'm saying you are lower than me. You're lower than me. You're a servant. You're a slave. So watch this. I hit him with this hand. Pow! I almost hit you, which would have been terrible. I hit you. Turn the other cheek toward me now. So I hit that cheek. Turn the other one toward me now.
Oh.
Like what? No, you've got to use this now. You've got to use your fist. What does that do now when he turns his cheek and now I have to hit him like this? Before he was a servant, now he's what? He's my equal. What did I just do? I wasn't a doormat. Austin's not a doormat when he does this. Austin just took back power. You see it? We take back power when we do this action. It's an intentional one. It's not just being a doormat. You're taking back power.
Tony, when you say in a previous statement about love thy enemies who are murdering you in war, can you then, same way that's a metaphor, not literal, can you make argument that that one is a metaphor as well, that you just don't love people that are murdering your children and your wife?
Yeah, you're taking. Thank you, Austin. Thank you. You're taking back power.
So you're actually, that's more of kind of passive aggressive with him doing that. He's not showing you the cheek that allows you to punch him, whereas loving someone that's just shooting you down with arrows and murdering you, that does seem metaphorical.
Yeah, there's a very loving act when I can choose to say, I love the person and I'm not going to escalate the violence. That's the whole point of this, because this was happening. This was very real in that culture. When you use this, that meant something. When you use this, that meant something. You just didn't use this. That meant something really powerful for them. You're taking back power, but you're not doing it in a violent way that's going to escalate it. You're essentially taking it back. And what you're doing is you're actually then letting them show their cards. you're letting them show the injustice that they're doing, right? By me hitting him again, it's very clear who the aggressor is and who the victim is. And the victim just took back power. Let me show you another one. If anyone wants to sue you, take your cloak, hand over your tunic as well. This is great, right? How many of you have ever heard this one before? In that culture, people were being sued all the time. And what happened is they would sue you, then they'd add interest, and before you knew it, you had nothing. So Jesus says, give me your cloak, but also give me your tunic. For us today, that doesn't mean a lot. Well, I don't have a tunic. I guess maybe my shirt. I don't know. I'll give you my cloak. For that, this is what the cloak was. That was your outer garment. The tunic was your underwear. Here's what happens in the Middle East. Nudity, it's shameful. But if it's me naked, I am not the one shamed. It's you who just took the clothes from me. You who are now looking at me, you did the action. Jesus says, when you do this, you take back power. Good? Yeah. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 with them, right? Here's why this is important. For a Roman, during that time era, Romans had packs that weighed 50% of their body weight. Modern soldiers today, 60% of their body weight. Isn't that interesting? A Roman soldier would be carrying these heavy packs, and written within the very code, their honor code, was this. You could choose any civilian that you see as you're walking. You could say, you, carry my pack. But the code was they could only go 1 mile because no non-Roman could possibly go 2. So watch this. After the 1 mile's done, you say to the Roman, I got this. I'll take another one. What you just did is you just took back power. You said, I am equal. Do you see it? And the Roman now shows himself to be unjust. Yeah? Good. We take back power differently. This was the message Jesus was sharing with them. The empire, the kingdom come reality, when heaven touches earth, it doesn't happen by escalating more violence. It doesn't happen by fear, by gathering around a common enemy. It happens when we learn to love one another, surrender one another, and take back power in very different ways that are restorative. Yeah, that kind of message will get you killed. That kind of message is really, really powerful. And that's why in the first century, that message took off. It was the first real social justice message we see there in the first century. You've heard it said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of the Father in heaven. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy? No. Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. I'm learning this very slowly. Whenever there are people that frustrate me, I have this tendency to just want to put them to the side. I want to not deal with them. I want to push them as far away as possible. Jesus says this, it's not the way to freedom. The way to freedom is to bring them close. Let them know you love them. You don't have to succumb to their crazy reality or disreality. You don't have to do that. Bring them close. Hug them. Go do your thing. But when we do this, when we can love that person fully, whatever love looks like, maybe it's not hugging, maybe it is keeping them at a bit of a distance, but whatever it is, when you can say I fully love them and I wish the very best intention for them, it's not them that's free. Who's free? You. You're free. In the middle of Roman captivity, to be able to say to my enemies, I love you and I wish the very best for you. To be able to do that, I no longer hold the burden of grudges, the burden of needing to get back at you. I am free. Is that a good message? Yes. Yeah, I'm no longer the victim. Yeah, you can't, I'm a victim only when I allow myself to be the victim. And so Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's around you. Over and over again, he says the kingdom of heaven is not something you're waiting for. It's something you experience. You live that right here, right now. The kingdom of heaven is within you. What does that mean? That sounds so mystical. For a group of people who were waiting for their temple to be rebuilt over and over again, that's where they thought the kingdom of heaven starts, with a building. And Jesus says this, it's not about a building anymore. It's about you. It's about you living freedom, that kind of life. So everywhere you go, kingdom of heaven is experienced. Every conversation you have. And I'm the biggest hypocrite of them all. It's the hardest thing in the world. Everywhere you go, you are the living, breathing, walking kingdom come reality.
I think it's a little bit more than that too, though. I think it's you choose to see that kingdom of heaven. Nobody else is going to do it to you. You talk about taking back power and all this. It's not really taking back power that you give it somebody. It's the power that you allow.
You've always had it.
That you always had within you. So the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's your choice to see it right now. It's up to you. It puts the responsibility back on you. It's there if you want it. You just got to see it.
And that's why I find it so interesting that when many people talk about the kingdom of heaven, they talk about someday, some far off thing. And that's really great for people who don't ever want to deal with anything now. Right? When it's that far off thing, I never have to live it then fully. But if it's here now, present within me, around me, then that means I have to do a little bit of like digging. Say, oh, it has been here. Oh, and I'm getting way ahead of myself because I'm going to go there in a second. Jesus also said this, go talk about the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, and then heal the sick. The word heal is sotar. We've translated that as salvation. Salvation had nothing to do with getting a golden crown, doing all the right things so you can get up there. Salvation was healing. It was actually a word that they used for doctors, sotar, healing. The practice of sotar, healing. So when you live that kind of life where you order the world differently and you walk in freedom, you experience healing and others experience healing. And so there's this really beautiful story. And I'm ripping off a guy that I heard him talk about this, and I thought, oh, it's so beautiful. He brought up this story in a way I'd never heard it before, and I'm going to do my best to recap it. This story is about a son who says to his father, Dad, I want your inheritance, which essentially meant, I wish you were dead, I want your money, which in that culture you would be killed for that. Dad, I want your money. I wish you were dead. Can I have your money? Can I have your inheritance? Can I have the blessings? And the father says, yep, here you go. And what the son does is interesting. Ever wonder why he doesn't just enjoy it at home? Why does he have to take off and go search elsewhere? He already has it. Why does he go elsewhere? Because he doesn't understand the blessing. So he goes and he tries to test the blessing out. He's trying to find it. And over again, he's not seen it. Then it even gets to the point where as a Jew, when you're lying with pigs, it's like the very lowest of low, right? So he's lying with a pig, and he finally comes to the realization, life more abundantly was there. There's something interesting there. And so what he does is he decides, I'm going to go home. I'm going to be a servant, right? He gets home, and father runs to him. But look what happens. Look what happens. He gives him a huge feast. He gives him a huge feast and welcomes son back. And he says this, all that I have is yours. It's always been yours. Whether you're there or here, it's always been yours. You just were not aware of it. And now think of the eldest son, who was, of course, Jesus was pointing to the Jewish people. The eldest son has been going to church. He's been doing all the right things. He's been right there. And he has missed it. How easy is it for many people in a religious culture to sit there and completely miss it. It's right there. I think it's very easy. I think it's almost harder sometimes for the eldest son, the people who are wrapped up in so much spiritual, religious stuff, to sometimes miss it. The blessing is right there. You can sing that song 100 times. I love music, by the way, but you can sing it 100 times. It's not going to bring heaven to earth, because heaven's already here in many regards. Kingdom of heaven is experienced right here in many, many ways. It's happening right here. This individual went on to talk about Henry Nouwen, and I want to share what he said to him about concerning this topic. How many of you have ever heard of Henry Nouwen? Henry Nouwen was a Catholic priest, and he wrote a lot of books about like the character of God and love and how to learn to embody love. And he lived just this incredible life of writing, 43 some books, classics. The thing about Henry Nouwen was that he was living this life where he couldn't fully be himself to his community. Henry Nouwen was a homosexual. And Henry, his whole life struggled because he could not fully be himself. Because if he came out to his community, what would happen? He'd be done. He'd be sent out. Henry wanted to serve the Lord so badly, but there was always that thing, and he didn't understand because he deeply loved the Lord. And yet he also had this deep desire to be in relationship and love another person. And those two never seemed to work out. And he was always in this place of just tension. One of the writers on Henry, he said this, and I wanted to read it to you. Henry wrote 43 books that he could never ultimately live. And he lived a book with his life that he could never ultimately write. Can I read that again to you? Henry wrote 43 books that he could never ultimately live. And he lived a book with his life that he could never ultimately write. That was Henry. And this individual I've been listening to, he said there's this moment with Henry where he left his larger parish and went to a smaller one. He needed to escape. And he said that he went to this smaller parish, and there he was taking care of the lowest of the low. And while he was there, he said he had this moment, this dream. And how this dream lands for you, I'm going to share it. Whether you see God as literal being, hands, fingers, toes, or God as the process of becoming, or the love, or the force, the energy, however you see God, take this as you will. But here was Henry's experience. Henry had a dream. And in the dream, he basically said, God, I want to come home. I want to come home. And in the dream, God said, then come home, Henry. Come home. And Henry said, as he looked at God there, he realized it was his college, his old college. But then as he looked closer at the college, he noticed that the walls were very fleshy looking. And he began to understand that is not actually a college at all, it's my heart. It's my heart. And he said, as he continued looking at the picture, Henry said, God, I cannot come in. I just can't come in. God, I want so desperately to enter my own heart. I want so desperately to live there, but I can't. I can't. And the words of Henry said, I can't live, God, in my own heart. And he said, God said this, Henry, I'm God. Henry, I have been here since the day you were born. If your heart can be home to the divine, then surely it can be home for you. Henry, come home. Come home, Henry. Stan Mitchell, the one who recounted the story, he says this: salvation is not a linear journey to become something you're not. It's a circular journey about going home to who you are and always have been. Salvation is not a linear journey to become something you are not. It's always been there. It's a circular journey, just like the prodigal. It's about going home to who you are, who you've always been. And so right now I want to say this to you. The gospel message is pretty simple. It's this: you're loved. You're loved and you're home. It's always been there. You don't have to go search for it. It's there. Just come home. Just walk in it fully. Salvation, healing is right here. It's right there. It's been there the whole time. How we experience it, is we learn to reorder life together. When you understand you're already home, you're already deeply loved, you are good enough, nothing you do or don't do takes that away. When you understand that, that's when you can begin reordering life around you. That's when you can begin loving your enemies. You can begin doing those things that the gospel message calls us to. But it starts with learning first and foremost, you're loved, you're home. Nothing you can do takes that away. Everything I have is yours. And when we get it, then we can begin reordering. Beautiful. I want to just open it up a few minutes. I promised you that I would have time for question and answers over any of the stuff we discussed, but especially in regards to this. Any questions, comments that we went over? And by the way, again, I love this group. I love that we are made of just a wide variety of faith to no faith to Eastern, Western. It's beautiful. And we all learn to get along and love each other. It's just phenomenal to me. Anything that landed well for you today?
The act of rebellion towards religion is circular.
Nice.
For me, it's a different perspective. We've talked, openly about it, and others in this room too. It's hard to dismantle it a little bit, but there's such a freedom that I personally discovered, where I don't have to do all this stuff right now before this happens or this happens. So instead of that, I'm trying to focus on just being positive and practicing that kingdom now. It's hard. It's hard at times. I don't want to turn my cheek. A lot of the time, I don't. But
there's a sense of peace that you've received from learning to abide in that, to live in it right now. It's good. Learning to live in it.
Question for you. Often leaders go in front of a group, so you're kind of tip of the arrow. So what has this deconstruction process felt like? You want to be vulnerable for you as a leader, having left a movement as a pillar and now leading out into a place where there's no map. What has that felt like for you?
Beautiful. What has this felt like for me? First off, when I understood the gospel message was not about a someday event, but a very present reality, what that did is that helped me learn to engage the present that I'm living in. And that has made a big difference for me. Also, when guilt and shame and fear were stripped away, I was no longer doing things because I was scared, because I felt I had to, because I felt guilted. I was doing things because I honestly wanted to become a better human. I wanted to be at peace with the people and the things around me. Am I doing it perfectly? Well, no, not yet. I'm learning slowly. But that for me was a big step, learning that this whole thing, I'm already home. I'm home. I'm loved. Learning to quit being so restless in it and learning to just live in it. That's freed me up to be a lot more honest and authentic and loving toward people. That was a big step for me. Again, when I I was really good at worshiping Jesus, but I was really terrible at following him. And for me, the shift has been, I don't spend a lot of time in worship. I spend a lot of time learning to walk it. And again, I'm not saying singing together is I'm not downplaying that. I'm saying for me, the worship is the life. It's the living it. It's the walking it. It's the daily step of learning to love my enemy. And when I don't, learning that really the issue is about I didn't know how to love myself. Those kind of things have been really big for me. And also the act of deconstructing, for me, I go through these phases of just beating the hell out of the stained glass, just smashing it. And I'm angry. And then all of a sudden I'll stop and say, man, that's not very constructive. And I'll stop and I'll go back and I'll pick up those shards and I'll say, you know what, this piece is actually really beautiful. And I think it has a home right here. Learning to have that balance has made a big difference for me, because there's a lot of shards there that have actually made a really beautiful picture for me lately. Yep.
Thank you for giving the different perspective on the prodigal son. Because when Jesus was with Mary and Martha at Lazarus' place, he said, you know, is it Mary who was the one who was always going around,
Right.
100 things going at the time, and then Martha was just there spending time with him. And I didn't quite understand what he said. Why did he say Martha has the right idea, and you know that won't be taken away from her? That's this different perspective this time.
Beautiful. Mary chose to sit and be at home, to fully embrace. Yeah. What's cool about that story too is that she sits at the feet of Jesus, which was something that a student of Torah would do, which was not a place for females typically. And Jesus says there's a place for females as well, which is really beautiful.
That just reminded me too. I think also it goes back to the fact of it's your choice, right? The prodigal son story is not only just about the gifts and everything. It's about an unconditional love, not only from the father, but the son having come back, right? So I just lost my totally. That never happens to me, right? Wow. Ooh.
It's a beautiful story.
That's not a Steve moment right there.
That's a Tony moment of not getting any sleep.
So it's not the dad that separated himself, like you're telling in the story right there. You said it's funny how the kid has to go out and learn on his own, you know, and find these gifts. But when he came back, the dad was so welcoming that love never left. It was the son that cut that line, you know. So when he came back, it wasn't like, oh, now my dad loves me again. He always did. It was the son that cut that off and chose to see it again.
And the beauty is, it was never really cut off. It was just, he was just unaware of it. His vision was pretty blurred, and he wasn't aware of he's already home. Well, let me leave you with this one more time. I want you to close your eyes before Betty, as Betty comes up. Just close your eyes for a minute, and I just want to say these words again to you. You are already home. Nothing you do or don't do changes that. You are loved. You're worthy of love. There's a space right there in your heart that's always been there, and it's already full, and it's just waiting to be given to others and shared. That love, that generosity, that forgiveness, it's all there within you. So I want you just to pretend like you're reaching down in that heart. You're pulling that good stuff, that gospel up. You got it in your hand, and now it's ready to be given. So again, my prayer for you is that as you go out, you might begin ordering the world with that goodness, that beauty, that kingdom of heaven come when heaven touches earth. May that be the thing that you give to the world. You are a walking, living, breathing temple. You're already home. You're already loved.